are now listening to the Serious Growth Podcast with your host, Leo Costa Jr.
I've been around long enough, so I got a few things done, so appreciate it.
No kidding. Hey, how old if you don't mind me asking you, how old are you?
I'm 53.
You're just a youngster, my man. I just turned 65 yesterday. Oh, you probably heard that.
I didn't hear, but congratulations. Happy birthday to you. No, like I said, I agree. I got a lot of living to do yet. So.
Oh, the crazy thing is I was turning 65. I've been telling this story because I'm so happy. I'm never really quite happy, just happy. I'm always happy with a little sadness or angriness, whatever. And when 3 weeks before my 65th birthday, I applied for Medicare. And I thought, well, this probably is going to be a nightmare to get because it's government-based. And I tell you something, it was one of the easiest things that I've done. And I got a raise from going on Medicare, man. It's awesome.
Oh, good to hear.
And,
awesome.
and they made it easy for me, the old guy.
As they
anyway,
should.
As they should.
I'm sure you put in your time. But like I said, I say complacency is a killer. Happiness is complacency.
I think you're absolutely right. I see here where you're an athlete, and it picks up on mainly, unless I didn't read this right, that I'm catching you when you're in like a college or after college, you're in athletics.
I've been doing it my whole life. I mean, I've literally been competing for 30, 40 years in different sports. So I mean, I went from semi-professional rugby to competitive powerlifting, where I was a national record holder, to Highland Games, where I was a world champ, to Masters track and field, where I was an All-American, to strongman competitions, where I was a national contender, and then finally I'm doing rowing was the most recent thing, where I broke several world records. And I've just literally within the last few months have started to switch into probably going to be doing this CrossFit competition stuff. So,
oh, interesting. Yeah.
All this stuff. Yeah.
I don't know about you. I've been in athletics all my life too. And, based on where you're at now and the stuff that you're doing, would you say that athletics had something to do or a lot to do with where you're at professionally?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't distance the mind and the body. I mean, I think having a highly functioning body certainly translates into a better mind and better performance overall. And so, absolutely, I mean, I think it's impacted me all around. It's I've got a deeply competitive streak, and it carries over to.
I can tell.
More than just athletics, for sure. Yeah, I want to be the best at everything I do. So.
I can tell that. It's quite obvious to me.
Yeah.
Oh, listen, welcome to the Serious Growth Podcast. I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I really want to talk to you about the carnivore diet. We have something in common here. And but what got you into? What made you decide you were in athletics and everything? But what made you decide to go into orthopedic surgeon?
Well, I mean, I knew I wanted to go into medical school probably sometime in high school, I think. I mean, I kind of started thinking about it. In fact, I started studying for this test called the MCAT, which is a medical college acceptance test, which most people take their junior year of college. I started studying for that when I was like 16, 17-year-old. The 16, 17-year-old while I was working. I remember I was working in a restaurant, started out as a dishwasher, then a busboy, then then I kind of helped deliver room service, and I had a position where I sit at this podium and greeted guests, but there was a lot of dead time. So I had my MCAT book, and I was studying for that. I was 16 greeting guests and doing that. And I knew I wanted to do medicine from a young age. And then as I became more of an athlete, orthopedics was something that just was, a natural progression. Orthopedic surgeons deal with a lot of athletes where, we have a very good understanding and working knowledge of the musculoskeletal system. And I'd already kind of started developing that, through just working with it as an athlete, as someone who was lifting weights and understanding.
Right.
That was a natural progression for me.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I also saw here that you were, I guess maybe this was part of your internship when you were, you did like 600 surgeries and it was an air base in Afghanistan, 2007?
Yeah, this was after I finished my training. This is, after I did my surgical training, my medical school residency, got out, came into the military. And, the military was kind enough to pay for my education. Prior to that, I had been a nuclear weapons guy and launched was one of the guys who would launch nuclear ICBMs. And when I got done with that, they allowed me to go to medical school. And so as a payback, I was sent to Afghanistan to do, trauma surgery and right in the thick of the Afghan war. And
Wow.
we're just seeing just all kinds of catastrophic injuries coming in every day, all day long, just hundreds and hundreds of them. And so it was a pretty, intense experience to put it mildly. And
Yeah.
it was definitely a learning experience for sure.
Yeah, I would say so. Was there like a common injury that came through when you were in Afghanistan, or was it just all over the place?
Well, I mean, it was, a lot of blast injuries, which is not something you typically see. And so we saw a lot of limbs that were blown off and, just all kinds of, the high energy, because you don't really see that kind of energy with normal like car wrecks or, things like you'd normally see. So there was such tremendous damage. And, we saw some of the blast wounds would extend much farther than the apparent site of injury. You would see what was destroyed and gone, but then you would realize there was so much more damage upstream, more what we call proximal up the limbs and into the body, that it took a long time to figure out for the damage to declare itself. And so it was multiple operations, bringing people back to the operating room about every 48 hours, constantly, washing out wounds, finding more debris and, shrapnel and trying to save as much as you possibly could. So yeah, I'd say blast wounds were one of the most common things, but we saw all kinds of just horrific things that you would never wish on your worst enemy. And
no kidding, man.
so
I would imagine that. I mean, that must have been so intense on every level. Were you forced to, because I'm assuming, I don't know, were you forced to have to sort of think on your feet and adapt in ways that you would have never had to do as a doctor?
Absolutely. I mean, it was in the US, if you're out of something, you can have it within 15 minutes. We were running out of things like saline, and you think, we're washing out, we don't have saline left. I mean, normally with orthopedics, you have, these systems and they all have their own parts that are designed with each other. And, even the different types of metal alloys, sometimes, we know that there's corrosion issues if you mix titanium and stainless steel and some of these other issues. And so, when we have in the US, you have the luxury of having screws in 1 and 2 millimeter increments. And there you're lucky, if you say, I need a screw that's 60, millimeters long. And they say, well, we got a 40 and we got a 75, which one you want? It's kind of like when they run out, there's no resupply. It's not like they can bring it in the next day. It's you're kind of down it. So we had to be very creative and think on our feet quite a bit and, kind of do things that were not, what we would do in the US, but it was definitely a place to be very, creative.
So how do you process something like that? Coming from where you were to all of a sudden being in Afghanistan where you're facing all this stuff, how do you, mentally, can you prepare for that? Or do you just have to go through the shock of that and hopefully, what kind of training do you have to have except the in the trenches training to get through that?
Yeah, I had, we had the basic skills that any surgeon gets, or theoretically gets coming out of their training. And, you don't, I saw some burn wounds and refinery blasts and some train accidents during my training, but it was just, not even, 5% of the severity that I was seeing there. And so I remember the first night when we got in, we landed, 3 days of traveling, flying in on military transport, stopping in Kyrgyzstan, and then finally flying into the cover of the darkness as they're shooting at you, landing. And then you get off the plane and we're in this big barracks, sleeping, 200 people on cots. And then we go to take over from the Army, and we were leaving the Army from their hospital. We were actually transitioning over from Army to Air Force, and I was in the Air Force. And the first night it was just like, hey guys, you want to come help out? And I said, sure, we'll go check it out. And there was this poor, I remember this guy, the first night I was there, was a Canadian kid, Special Forces kid. He had a full beard because Special Forces guys would wear beards, and he had both legs blown off above the knee.
Oh,
like, you see this 22-year-old kid, his life is irrevocably changed. It's just like,
oh yeah.
And it was like welcome to war and another day at the office type of thing. And it was that, and it was just nonstop after that. So you just got and you had to make the best of it. Unfortunately, I had a very good partner, another orthopedic surgeon, and we really just sort of kept each other sane, and we kind of used a little bit of humor and just putting in perspective. And fortunately, we had some capacity to exercise, and just kind of had a routine that was pretty. Didn't have time for much of anything else. There was no downtime. It was eat, sleep, get some exercise in, and work all day, every day, as much as you could. And a lot of time it was in the middle of the night, and it never ended. So.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about that, because I'm not correlating this to training, because, obviously if you train every day like this and it's extreme, at some point your body starts shutting down and goes into overtraining. Did you guys, was part of your recovery doing what you said, exercising, you just taking a break? I mean, it doesn't seem like you were on 21 days and off for 10. You were just like in it the whole time, right?
Yeah, we were on every day. We never took a break. We tried our best not to operate on Sundays, but we never really made that happen because there was always fresh trauma came in, because we were at a referral center. And so we would have not only anything that happened in the local areas, fresh trauma. This is at Bagram, which is one of the main facilities that they had there military wise, but we would get all the outside trauma as well. We get referred to us. They would stabilize these guys, manage them up, stick them in a, medevac, and then they would come to us, and then we would do further surgery. So we were constantly getting trauma. Yeah, we never took a break. I mean, sometimes we tried to say, it's your turn to be up all night. We would try to alternate that. But I mean, in most cases, we did everything together just because, it always helped to have an extra pair of eyes and
Sure.
hands on deck, just because it was, I didn't get a lot of sleep for about 6 months while I was there. So it was,
man.
it was tough.
Well, I'm glad you made it back.
Me too.
Okay, so let's talk about the carnivore diet. When I saw that, and I saw you on Joe Rogan, by the way, I believe you were talking about that on his podcast.
Right.
And, the carnivore diet reminded me immediately of Vince Gironda, and it just so happened that you were talking about steak and eggs. But my question to you is, what got you into the carnivore diet, and where were you coming from when you decided to go that route?
Yeah, so I mean, I was just about turned 50 when I went on the diet, but I mean, I'd spent about 6 or 7 years prior to that kind of playing with diets. As like I said, as an athlete my whole life, training wasn't the problem. I was training my ass off. I mean, I train hard every day, and I still do, and that's just part of who I am. It's kind of hardwired into me. But I found at about age 42, 43 that I was starting to develop metabolic syndrome. I was just not feeling that good. And so I went through this nutritional journey, and again, all kinds of different diets, low fat, high fiber, lean protein, to paleo, to low carb, to ketogenic diets. And then I kind of just started, looking, just continue. I was fascinated with diet and the impact it had on health. And as I saw this group of people that were eating this sort of all meat diet, I started studying these guys for about a year, just kind of reading what they were doing, seeing what the success was. Looked at guys like Vince Gironda, some of the other athletes in days gone by that used, meat heavy diets or steak and eggs types diets to improve performance. And I was really looking at, more than anything, just athletic performance. And so I just said, well, I'm going to do it I tried it for, a week, and it's fine, no big deal. And then I tried it for a little longer. I got to 2 weeks, and finally I got to about a month in 2016. I did it for a solid month, and I honestly felt really good. I was like, wow, this is, I enjoy it. I feel good. My energy's great. And then I said, well, it was a 1 month experiment. I went back to the regular diet that I've been on, which is a more omnivorous diet. And I just didn't feel as good. Some of the aches and pains that had gone away started to come back. And I was like, I really don't like having aches and pains. I prefer to feel good and wake up with energy and not having my joints hurt. So I said, well, I'm going to go back to the sort of the meat-based diet, the carnivore diet. And I just kind of pursued that. And then 6 months in, people started thinking I was kind of crazy. And then I kind of convinced about, a few hundred other people to try it. And we collected data, and we found that the vast majority of them lost a bunch of weight, saw their heart rate decrease, saw all their subjective things that we could measure got better. We looked at a lot of things, and then I just kept going. And now it's been, 3.5 years later, and I'm still on this thing and still not dead and still thriving. And obviously, a lot of Joe Rogan and a lot of other people that have done it. Now we've got professional athletes, guys in the NFL, other professional athletes are now doing it and seeing good results. And so I think it's just, I think there's a lot to it. I can talk about mechanisms by which it might work and why it's beneficial, but at the end of the day, it seems to work for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's what we want at the end of the day. So results are what count. I don't care what your theory is. I don't care what your process is. Show me the money, show me the results. It's all.
I agree with you on that deal there. All right, let's take a quick break so I can tell you about our product.
Do you want a bone-crushing grip? Good, because you're gonna get one with the amazing new TRS gripper. It's a progressive grip builder with longer handles and a special ergonomic design that's like a dozen hand grippers in one. Start off easy and work your way up to quickly build your grip strength from wet noodle to pulverizing. The package includes a video from the world-famous strength coach, Dr. Russ Horine, the man who worked with Leo Costa to help bring you big beyond belief in the Bulgarian Power Burst. Dr. Horine shows you a simple and easy to follow workout plan that takes just minutes a day right from in front of your TV set if you want. So click on the link below and let's get started building you a stronger, firmer, bone-crushing grip.
Well, it's like I said, Vince, I was up and close with Vince. I don't know how much you knew about him or if you ever met him.
Never met
But
him.
I came through and I was lucky, man. I got to meet the guy in person. And I have to tell you, maybe you've heard some of the stories. Vince is one of the most cantankerous people I've ever met to this day, but he was pretty amazing. And I got to train at his studio there in North Hollywood. And it was really interesting because how I got to Vince was through a guy named Bob Green. He wrote from one of the Muscle Macs. But what was interesting was that when I met this guy, I said, "Hey, where's Vince's gym? And can I go down there and train at his place?" He says, "Well, come on down. And when you get there, I'm going to go inside and I'll ask Vince if you can come in." I mean, that was just like, I'm thinking, what the hell? You got to ask for me to go into a gym or a studio. And that's when I started really learning about the man himself. But he was quite something. And he had some ideas and the way he trained and, of course, his diet. And as you mentioned in your podcast, he had a damn good physique, especially in those times, And but have you heard of a guy named Mauro Di Pasquale? He's a doctor.
Yeah. Back when I was powerlifting, he's a Canadian guy. He had I think it was called the anabolic diet, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I know more. I've read, when I used to do Powerlifting USA, I used to read his articles, and I've read some of the stuff on Vince Carano saying that he was a bit of somewhat of a bear to deal with at times for certain people. He had his way or the highway type of thing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
well, Dr. Di Pasquale and I wrote the anabolic diet.
Okay, gotcha.
And of course, back then when we did this, it was much different than it is today as far as how people perceive these diets. I mean, you talk about, people think that you're crazy doing it now. You should have, back in the late 80s or early 90s when I wrote this book with Di Pasquale, I mean, it was, it wasn't sexy back then at all by any means. Like keto diet, it's like kind of a big buzz word now, and it's people see it in a much different way. But no, we wrote that diet together actually. And how is when you're doing your carnivore diet, do you come off the diet at all for a couple of days, or are you always do you keep your carbohydrates at a certain level? And if so, how many carbs are you taking daily?
Yeah, so I've really been able to do this without carbohydrates. I mean, I haven't really done anything other than just a very rare, thing, like if it's my kid's birthday, I'll have a piece of cake on there or something like that. But I generally don't. I mean, what I do now is I cycle energy right now. And I think it's a similar concept to what, I know Vince was doing the refeeds every 4 or 5 days. And I find that for me, as I dig deeper into this and I look at, the energy systems, and I look at like de novo lipogenesis and de novo or gluconeogenesis, I find that cycling energy, and I do it in the form of fat because, if we look at biochemically what's essential, it's we have essential amino acids, essential fats, vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates are not essential, although they're conditionally beneficial for certain people at times. I'm on a very high protein version. I mean, generally most of the time I'm 300, 400 grams of protein a day, sometimes more. And my body weight's probably 230 pounds, something like that. I'm pretty lean right now. But I'll spend maybe every third to seventh day I'll cycle in a higher fat type of approach. So I don't really do much with carbohydrates. I've tried that. I've tried the cyclic ketogenic diet years ago, and I didn't have the success. I mean, mainly because I would get symptoms with those types of food. It might have been maybe just digging and finding the right carbohydrate. I don't necessarily think carbohydrates are necessarily bad or problematic. I think sometimes how they're packaged is really the issue for some people. And I think some people just have sensitivity, whether it's gut sensitivity or other things that occur due to years of damage from eating just crap, which all of us are exposed to through time. And so I am not opposed to that at all, cycling back in. And I've tried to bring in fruits and things like that. And I just, honestly, when I do that, I just don't feel quite as good. And, I guess at age 53, for me, it's a balance between feeling good and do I get a performance advantage of that? And for me, I prefer to feel good. I honestly, I train hard. I try and train intensely almost every single day. I really don't need to take recovery days or rest days frequently at all, which is kind of unusual because, as you hear, you get older, you need more rest, you need more recovery. I've not found that to be true. And I think part of that it has to do with, one, the fuel I'm feeding myself is very good at rebuilding. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at lean muscle mass being torn down or turned over, feeding yourself meat is very efficient at restoring that. And then I also find that I don't seem to have the reactive oxygen species in the oxidative load or oxidative stress load that maybe other people would have on a higher carb approach. And so I tend to train 7 days a week most times. And if I need a day off, I'll take it. My body will say, hey, it's time for a day off, and I'll take it. If I don't program them in, unless I'm traveling and I don't have the capacity to train, but I usually, and even then I might just do push-ups or some kind of body weight exercise on the road.
Yeah.
So I don't do the carb refeeds. I used to, but I don't do them anymore.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, like I know you go through periods where you actually increase fat intake, but what is your grams of fat that you're eating just normally before you ramp up a little bit?
Yeah. So currently, and again, I'm in a leaning out phase. I'm probably 70% protein, 30% fat, which is, that's pretty lean. When you look at it, when you're looking at what kind of protein source you have to eat when outside of like protein powders or that you're looking at a lot of fish. I'm eating a lot of white fish. I'm eating a lot of sirloin steak. I'll cook the fish in a little bit of butter or ghee, but not too much. And then I'll flip that around on a refeed day. I'll probably go 70% fat on the refeed days. Maybe even higher, depends. And, my caloric intake normally, 3,500 to 4,000 calories a day is kind of my leaner days. If you just calculate, like, if you were to calculate what I would need as a lean athlete at 6'5", 230, I'm looking at about 4,000 calories a day, regardless, just to kind of run my system with the basal metabolic rate and the activity level I'm doing. And then on those refeed days, I'm probably 5,000-6,000 calories, something like that, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. And again, this is coming back from the way we had ours. When I say ours, the anabolic diet, it was based on taking in about 60% fat. Now, so my question to you is, if your body is on when you go into the kind of diet that you're on, your body switches over its metabolism to free fatty acid, which is fat. Your body's operating on fat energy. If you're taking in that much protein, and I know there's a certain amount of fat in the protein that you're taking, but overall in those days, you're doing 30% of your diet is coming from fat. So does it make sense, or tell me what your take is on, if that's the case, if you're in a free fatty acid metabolism and you're eating that much protein, don't you think that your body would be more efficient eating a higher fat diet to begin with?
Well, I mean, that's assuming the goal is to run on ketones. As you know, we run on a blend at all times. It's never that our glucose is bottomed out to zero. In certain activities, highly glycolytic activities, higher intensity, you're still going to utilize glucose. So I think it depends on the activity. If I were doing a lot of just sort of lower intensity stuff, and some of that can be lifting, obviously lifting isn't always, super high intensity. Some of the cardiac conditioning stuff can be lower intensity. I probably do utilize a fair bit of glucose for what I do. I mean, gluconeogenesis, we know is upregulated in a higher protein state. We know the glycogen restoration is better in a high protein state. I think we look at some of the new data out there looking at low carb athletes, particularly endurance athletes. We know that they need more protein, and that may be related to refilling overnight liver glycogen stores. And so I think there is that combination. I had and this was earlier, I was tested on a metabolic lab, and I was showing that I was burning ketones, and I had, for steady state cardio, which I was doing on a rowing machine. So I'm still kind of tapping into both to some degree. But I find that, you know, I think having that refeed day periodically probably restores, because we look at, athletes, there's this concept of insulin resistance showing up with, fatty acids in the muscle cells. And so we have these intramuscular fat globules that occur. But in athletes, we seem to see triglycerides, and those can be utilized for energy. And we don't see this insulin, resistance phenomenon occurring in those athletes. But we do see that when we see other types of fats, particularly ceramides and diacylglycerides, which I think are problems with incomplete metabolic oxidation of fats. But I think by doing those periodic feeds, I probably refill some of those fat stores, just like I'm filling my glycogen stores up with the protein. And I think that's enough to last me 3 or 4 days or 5 days. And then I kind of, on that 4th or 5th day, I start to see a little dip in energy, and then I refeed. And I don't want to get to the point, as you guys talk to, probably with the same thing with your diet, you want to change things every periodic, so your body doesn't get used to something and start making those adaptations that occur chronically. And the timing of that, I think, varies a little bit from person to person.
So when you say that when 30% of your diet is coming from fat, now, and you're saying that you're getting a breakdown for glucose, is that coming from the carbon that your body breaks down out of there's a carbon that your body has in protein that it can convert to glucose? Do you think that glucose energy is coming from there? Is that what I'm hearing? Or are you saying that it also is getting some of that glucose energy from the triglycerides? I'm not really 100% sure.
Well, when we look at de novo, when we look at gluconeogenesis, obviously you can take the glycerol molecule off a triglyceride and you can convert that. Yeah, that generally happens less so. Again, it depends on what your overall fuel source, but protein seems to be maybe a more commonly used substrate. There are certain amino acids which are gluconeogenic. There are certain ones that are strictly ketogenic. There are some that are both. And I think what we see, theoretically, and again, this goes back to the 1920s when they were looking at how much glucose can you convert from 100 grams of protein. It was anywhere between 30 and 55 grams. That's a theoretical number. Now, in practice, when they do radioisotopic data, labeled carbon, and they feed them amino acids, they find that number tends not to be that efficient. We tend to see less gluconeogenesis. And so some of that shows up in, probably there's some glycogen that's restored. But as far as, circulating glucose, there's probably less from protein than we think there is. And that may change with diabetics. Diabetics have a sort of different, a different way of handling these things. And we see upregulated de novo gluconeogenesis from the liver. So I think, but you are right. It's coming from the carbons. That's the only place it can come from. If you're not taking any exogenous carbohydrate, you've got to make your own glucose. And so it's going to come from carbon. And the same thing with the free fatty acids. The fatty acids that our liver makes, it's typically coming from carbon skeletons that are coming from the fat we ingest, and then the carbohydrates we ingest, particularly things like fructose and some of the other fatty acids. And so some of the problems people talk about circulating fatty acids being problematic, it's because it's coming from the liver, and it can come from, the carbon skeletons come from different sources. So you can eat too much sugar, you can eat too much fructose, you can eat too much fat. Anything that's going to overload your mitochondria eventually is going to end up with this energy overload, which is going to result in mitochondrial overload, which is going to result in these incomplete products of beta oxidation, which is going to end up, causing insulin resistance and then probably contributing to obesity at some point. So there still is an energy component to this, but I do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Now, when you said earlier on in the show that when you were messing with carbohydrates a little bit like the keto diet, and you said you didn't feel as good, would I be correct in describing that maybe you felt lethargy at that point when you brought the carbs in? Is that what you meant by not feeling quite as good?
A couple things. And again, these were, and I tried different combinations. As you're probably aware of, things like carb backloading, where you do it at night. There's carb nights where you just, spend 1 day a week loading up, targeted ketogenic diets where you bring a little bit of carb in peri-workout, either pre-workout or during the workout, intra-workout. I found, particularly with the carb loads, I felt gastrointestinal issues. 2, I started to feel like just inflamed, like I just didn't, I just felt like I was sore. I was just kind of achy back, achy knees. As you get older, these aches and pains, they let you know really quick, and then it's harder to train. And I was just like, maybe I have more energy, but my knee hurts and I don't want to squat.
Right.
And so those are the kind of things I was running into. And so, and to be honestly, and I did that for many months, and I would just I would look forward initially to those carb refeeds, because I was like, oh, I get to eat all this and this and this. And I would, I would look at, these calculators and say, you need to eat 700, 800, 900 grams of carbohydrates on this day, which is quite a bit of carbohydrate, for just trying to get through all of that. I would just by about the 4th or 5th week, I was like, man, I can't eat anymore. It was tough, but I didn't, maybe because maybe it has to do with age. And I do think, as we get older, some of the our capacity to handle carbohydrates, particularly, and I went through a period of time where I definitely had metabolic syndrome. I had metabolic disease, so I probably had already beaten my body up to a point where, maybe if I had this strategy back in my 20s, instead of just being on the seafood diet and just eat as much as you possibly can to get big, which I did. I went from 230 to 280, over a period of 2 or 3 years, just eating 7,000-8,000 calories a day, just trying to be a big power lifter. And that probably in retrospect wasn't the best way to do that. Some of the things that we do
in the sports. I don't know if you know much of it. Do you believe in because when we talked about the anabolic diet, we talked about how it takes 3 days for your body, because most people are on a glucose, pretty typical glucose type of diet, right? So what we talked about was it takes 3 days for your body to transition from glucose to free fatty acid metabolism. Would you agree with that?
I think it takes that and maybe longer for some people. I mean, I think there's a minimum. I mean, I think there's, if you look at the work like Jeff Follick and some of those guys, they will say, even up to 3 weeks for some people. But I do find that that's probably a minimum number for a lot of people. And again, I think mostly what you guys are dealing with are probably athletes, and I think when you look at the overweight, perimenopausal woman, that might be a longer issue for some of those folks. And but I would agree that definitely there is a transition period for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I know when we first had people go on this, and again, the anabolic diet mainly targeted athletes. And I agree with you on that analogy that you just said. But so what we would do is we would have people, just to make sure that they got transitioned, we made sure that the first week we just had them on the high fat diet. They had no carbs, or 30 grams of carbs, 30 to 40 grams of carbs. Otherwise, it was just, they didn't get a chance to cycle off, because what we ended up doing is we had it, because going with that theory that your body takes 3 days before it switches metabolisms, what we would do with our people, our athletes, is on the weekend, because most people socialize on the weekend. That's why we did this cycling on the weekend. We'd have them go off the high fat diet and just eat whatever carbs that they wanted. And I did that. And we call it the 52 diet. 5 days on the high fat, low carb diet. And then Saturday and Sunday, in this case, go out and forget about your protein intake. It really doesn't matter. Your protein intake at that point, at least for me, was about 10% of my diet. I didn't worry about that. I just carb loaded. One of the reasons that we did that was to create, and we always carb load up. So the calories were usually a little bit lower during the week. And then on the weekend, we carb load. I'm pretty heavy. Like during the week, I was eating probably around 2,700 calories a day. And on the weekend, I'd eat 10,000 calories a day. But part of the reason that we did that was to temporarily stress the physiology so it would secrete growth hormone. So we were doing it for that reason as well. But one of the, obviously, the things that happened to me was eating that many carbs on that weekend. It made me really lazy, lethargic. I didn't feel good, to be honest with you. I mean, the reason that we were doing that was for a certain effect, not necessarily for feeling good, which is kind of crazy. But again, the things that we do for sport. But one of the things I learned about carbohydrates was changed my carb loading on the weekend, because again, I just felt so lethargic. It was hard to do anything. Is all I did was increase my fat intake when I was carb loading, and fat absorbs sugar. It slows the release of it in your bloodstream. And all of a sudden, those carbohydrates became a better carbohydrate, if that makes any sense. And it really smoothed out the energy levels and the whole thing. And then, of course, when you're dealing with the average person, Shawn, I mean, for them to be on this high protein diet, and look, I have no issue with being on the high fat diet. I'm an athlete. I'll do whatever it takes. I can be on it every day like you. But for the average person that's out there, are you finding that it's very difficult for them to stick on this type of diet?
Well, again, it depends on the person. I find that, like when we talk about the concept of this carnivore diet, so a lot of people come to this, really, and again, we're talking, different people here. A lot of people come to this because they're just hopelessly, addicted to junk food, or they can't get off that. I mean, it's kind of like a cold turkey approach. And what I find that what it does help, these people that do it for 2-3 months, they get away. It's like trying to get a heroin addict off heroin by giving them heroin every 3 days. It just doesn't work. So you got to get them off that stuff. And I find many people, they feel better. I mean, because it depends where your starting point. For the average athlete, it feels pretty good. It's like, what significant difference is it going to make? And most people, honestly, that do this diet end up sort of carnivore-ish, where they'll eat mostly meat and then they'll add in, a few other foods. And I think that's completely fine too. I mean, whether it's berries, whether it's a piece of avocado, whether it's, maybe some white rice here and there, something that makes it more tolerable, I think that's fine. But there are, I think, a subset of the population that, will find that, and again, we're not talking about the cohort you and I are used to dealing with, which were high-level athletes, people that are really disciplined. But there's a lot of people that don't have that discipline, and they find that if they go off the rails a little bit, they find that they go on a 6 months, bender, and they're back to where they were, and then they come back again. But I find that for some people, well, the way I tell them to do, just enjoy the damn thing, make enough variety. It doesn't have to be ground beef every day. I mean, there's a lot of variety you can do. You can use seasoning and spices and those things to make it more exciting. If assuming you tolerate it okay, and then I think you have to tailor it after that. And I think, like when I deal with athletes, I talk to them about, well, what are your goals? Can carbohydrates be part of your nutritional strategy? In many cases, the answer is yes. And it's targeted around training cycles, around exercise, performance goals, around, particular training sessions. And then what are those carbohydrates? Again, we have glucose in our body. It's there. We make it. We need it. It's essential. We shouldn't just demonize it completely. When we have to figure, like you said, everybody's on this glucose roller coaster typically, and that's clearly not the best place to be either. So I think there is some room for, nuance and subtlety there. Not everybody has to be strict, and I don't promote that. I tell people that may be something, because I'm dealing with a lot of people that have autoimmune disease or Crohn's disease or IBS or, bipolar disorder or things like that. And this is where this sort of stricter approach seems to help those people in a way that a lot of the approaches don't work. And I think there's something unique. Unfortunately, we've got Harvard University doing studies on this right now, which is going to sort of hopefully bring this a little more credibility, because I've been out here sort of beating the drum for a couple of years now. And, to credit to you guys have been doing this. Like I said, I am by no means the first guy to suggest a meat-heavy diet or even an almost all-meat diet is beneficial. I mean, there's guys that have been going back to the 1700s, that have been talking about this. I'm just, I think we're in this day and age of social media and interaction where more people are getting the message out here.
Yeah. It was crazy back when I was doing this, on purpose, because I wrote the book. I started talking about it, and just locally at all the service groups, wherever I can. And back then it was amazing to talk, because I did it on purpose. I scheduled myself where there were doctors, and when I would tell them about this high fat diet, they'd look at me like I was insane. And then when I told them that, because this is what the studies stuff that we did, it's like, if you want to drop your cholesterol, eat fat. I mean, who the hell tells you that? Instead of eating carbohydrates, eat fat, and your cholesterol will start dropping and it'll straighten up. And I don't know if you've had that happen with the people that you're working with, but the point is, I would tell people that a high fat diet is actually a healthy diet. And I think it's starting to prove the studies and the information that's out there now, like with the keto and how it helps people that are having seizures and things like that. I think it's starting to show that benefit. Would you agree with that?
I mean, a high-fat diet can certainly be a healthy diet. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it can also be an unhealthy diet depending on how you administer it. But I mean, yeah, I mean, you can certainly do a high-fat diet and get very, very healthy. I see it all the time. And there are people,
Yeah.
like I said, I tend to steer towards a higher protein just because I think protein is important for muscle building. I mean, I
Yeah.
think most people would agree with that. I mean, the literature, regardless of what you believe, shows that protein is important, and muscle is important for longevity, health, function, disease prevention, all those types of things. But yeah, I mean, I do see people with high-fat diets. It helps with satiety very well. They often lose weight. They find their hunger is gone, which is, this is a really liberating thing to not be hungry all the time. And I don't know
Yeah.
if you are a proponent of, infrequent meal eating. I know intermittent fasting and sort of
Big
time
time.
restricted eating windows are
Yeah.
helpful. And I do it. I haven't eaten yet. I've already worked out twice today.
Yeah.
I probably won't get to eat because I still got a lot of stuff to do yet. It's probably not gonna be 4 or 5 hours before I'll eat. So it'll be maybe 4 p.m. before I eat probably my only meal of the day. And it'll be like 3 to 4 pounds of meat, or something maybe.
Yeah.
But I find that being in a low carb state or a higher fat state, and even in my leanest version, 30% fat is not super low fat. I mean, we look at these people, these plant-based advocates who are suggesting 10% of your caloric intake coming from fat.
Yeah.
That's low fat. That's really, really hard to do and really
Yeah.
unpalatable in my view. And then there'll be
I
days,
agree.
like I said, I'm eating, 200-300 grams of fat a day, on these sort of periodic refeeds. And to be fair, I'm only right now, because I'm leaning out a little bit. Am I doing this? But normally my diet was probably 60% fat day in and day out, over a long period of time, usually 2 meals a day, a lot of ribeye steaks, a lot of brisket, a lot of, foods cooked in fats. And that's really a good sort of baseline diet where I'm just chilling out. I'm happy. I'm fat, dumb, and happy. I'm not, I'm not stressing. I mean, I maintain a reasonably good body composition. But again, when you get down to this really, really lean state where most people don't sustain it anyway, it's kind of a different narrative. If you look at what bodybuilders do and what fitness competitors do to get really, really lean, they're usually high protein, low energy. It's kind of low carb, low fat. It's chicken breast and leaves.
Yeah.
You know the deal is, and that's what they do.
You'll eat dirt if that's going to make you
Right,
leaner.
right,
That
exactly.
mindset.
Yeah.
You understand that. It was amazing to me when I first went on this high fat diet was I couldn't believe how addicted, and I think most people are like this, how addicted I was to sugar. We told people that went on that diet, it's going to take about 3 months before your body stops just yearning for that sugar. I mean, Shawn, there was like times where I just went to bed early because, again, I was carb loading on the weekend, but I would go to bed early just because I was so wanting that damn carbohydrate. And I think people are just very addicted to the sugar more than they even think. I mean, I was. But after that 3 months, I tell you what, it was a whole different ball game, and it's never been like that, since. So there's something to that addiction to the sugar, man.
Oh, absolutely. And I find that and your time frame is pretty darn accurate. That's what I see over and over again when these people are doing the same sort of diet. I mean, they spend, 60 days, 90 days, some a little longer to break that sugar addiction. And then once they break it, then life becomes easier. I mean, life is, it's like you've got this freedom now. It's like a superpower.
It's true.
I mean, because I remember being at work, as a physician, and I'd sit there and somebody bringing a plate of cookies or some birthday party stuff, piece of cake or some donuts or whatever. And you walk by 3 or 4 times, and you're going to be strong. And by the 5th time you walk by, you're like, damn it, I eat one. And then you kid is eating one, and then now you've just down half a dozen donuts.
Exactly.
It just happens. And now, I mean, you can put this up in front of me all day long, and I'm like, no, I'll wait for my steak. I'm good.
It is so true. I tell you what, yesterday, again, it was my birthday. So my staff here, they tried to surprise me, and they did kind of. Well, they brought in 2 dozen donuts, right? And like you said, back in the old days before I broke this addiction, I would have eaten every one of those donuts. And that's not an exaggeration. And now I can pass that stuff up. It doesn't faze me whatsoever. And I think it's because of that, breaking that one time like that. It changed me forever that way. And I have to tell you something, talking about intermittent fasting, I never did that when I was in my competing days, but I had 3 strokes about 8 years ago that screwed me up, and I made some changes. And one of the things I started doing was intermittent fasting. I intermittent fast every single day, and I love it. I feel better doing it. And I don't, to be honest with you, I don't know why everybody doesn't do that, to be honest with you, based on how I feel every single day. It sounds like you're the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I often look at an evolutionary perspective on diet. I think it makes some sense to me. And I'm just thinking, we have this snack ingrained culture, and we have an entire industry. It's like eat every 15 minutes. When I was a kid, I'm sure you were a kid and you were hungry after school. Your mom would say, wait for dinner. You're going to spoil your appetite. And now it's like, here's a juice box. Here's a granola bar.
Exactly.
So we have this whole entire industry set up on constantly feeding us. And if you think about it, as hunter-gatherer, nomadic people, can you imagine if you were like walking in the tribe, you're going to your next hunt and you're like, hey, I'm hungry. Can we stop and break camp every 2 hours? I mean, because you got to set the fire. It's like, what the hell? I mean, you probably once or twice a day is all you really could have done.
Oh, that's funny.
So it's like we just are not designed to be eating every friggin' 5 minutes like we do now. I mean, we constantly graze. We constantly have, we're spiking insulin. We're spiking.
Yeah.
And that is clearly not the way to be.
And it goes against popular belief, because I happen to agree with you. I think eating less times a day is actually more efficient. In my mind, that's my opinion based on how I feel. And I feel way better than I did when I was eating, as a bodybuilder. It was just like ingrained to our heads, 6-7 times a day. It's like, shit, you're eating every, seems like all day long.
You're like a gorilla out there chewing 40 pounds of leaves all day. I mean, and it depends what you eat, because, we know that, like, and this is the problem, we have a lot of studies on protein, and it's all whey protein studies, because no one has the money to do studies on people eating steak. I mean, those studies aren't done. And so we know what happens with the digestion of steak is it's much slower. I mean, our body slows things down so it can extract all the amino acids, all the nutrients out of that meat. And so instead of this whey protein bolus where you get this, rapid influx of, of amino acids, and then it's gone. And this is where we're seeing you can only absorb 30 grams of protein at a time, which is not consistent with human evolution. I mean, you think about it, if we had to only eat 30-gram protein boluses throughout evolution, we would have starved to death. I mean, how could we have done that? Well, we sat down, we would eaten our fill, probably would have been several pounds of whatever, rhino or hippo or elephant or deer or whatever the hell we call it. We eat that stuff, and then our body slowly digests it, absorbs it. We have a steady level of glucose due to slow release of gluconeogenic amino acids, and then we have a steady influx of amino acids, and we're constantly sort of just getting the nutrition we need. And I think that's different than some of the studies out there where it's like here's this. It's the same thing. The whey protein is equivalent to the refined grains. I mean, it's not how food is processed by humans.
Right.
We just have this ultra processed, super high efficient, super high absorption capacity, which is, it's just not compatible with human normal existence.
I have to tell you, and again, I learned this from firsthand experience, and this is, when I had these strokes, and like I said, I made some changes, and I never had a hernia from training, but I was paralyzed on one side of my body, and I recovered from it. But so I had to get this hernia fixed, which I never got hernias from training, but I got it from trying to rehab my body and paralysis. Anyway, so I had all these tests done. And, at that point, I'm 56 years of age, and the doctor says, well, overall, you're blocked. I think he said 30%. I think it was 20 or 30%. And I thought, man, that's brutal. I mean, I didn't think I was going to be that blocked. Well, he told me, he said, we don't even, it was 30% blocked overall. He said, we don't even start addressing with stenting and medication until about 60 or 70%. And I found that horrifying. But what I did is I wanted to see if I could make a change in that blockage for the next year. So what I did is this is when I started intermittent fasting, and I compartmentalized my diet in a certain way. But I went back a year later, and they did that very same test, and I reduced that 30% by about 30% blockage by about another 20%. And the doctors were just amazed at that. And I think that's just a testament of what a nutrition in that case can do, because my training has never changed. I'm not the bodybuilder that's training for a show anymore. I'm just an old guy having a good time and fun. in the gym, and I trained consistently, but it was that making that adjustment in that diet had that powerful effect. And I think it's a testament to what diet can do if you got it nailed down.
Yeah, we are seeing, within the high-fat community, the ketogenic community, a lot of people starting to demonstrate reversal of coronary vascular disease, particularly things like coronary artery calcium scans, which, again, that is, I know there's people collecting data on that'll hopefully make publications soon. So we are seeing that for sure. I do think you can see it. I tested mine and I didn't have a baseline, but my coronary artery calcium score was a complete zero, nothing. And I've been on this diet an all meat diet for over 5 years now at that point. And then I continue to perform just really well cardiovascularly with my training. And so I do think there is something to that. I do think you can reverse disease. I think diet plays a huge role in that, and I think we're going to find out more and more on that. Good for you for doing what you did, though.
I was convinced. I mean, the thing that cracked me up is my doctor was saying, "Well, how did you do that?" I just thought that was kind of interesting. And the diet is. I learned from myself firsthand, Shawn. Well, listen, as we're winding this thing up, was there anything that you'd like to promote? Maybe your book or anything that you'd like to tell us about, and so we know where to get your book on this show?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that, my book's called The Carnivore Diet, Shawn Baker, MD. It's on Amazon and some, whatever. I think it was in a lot of bookstores and stuff like that. I'm really, kind of excited about MeatRx.com. So it's meat like meat and RX like prescription.com. It's just this huge community we've built with a huge resource for anybody that wants. We have the largest sort of, library of research articles on, diet, high-fat diets, high-protein diets, medical stuff. We have 8,000 plus articles, medical literature articles on this stuff. We have a huge supportive community. We have recipes. We have, daily meetings. Every morning at 9 a.m., I conduct a meeting with 50 to 100 people coming on a Zoom chat. We just chat about things, answer questions. We have, meetings for support for all kinds of stuff. I think one of the problems we have with the healthcare industry is it's an industry, but two, it's become the disease management or even say disease maintenance industry, where all we're doing is we're not fixing people. We're band-aiding them. We're putting on pills. We're adjusting their medications up and down. We're not really, doing what you did. We're reversing disease, getting rid of disease. We're just placating people, and it's a shame. And this is an alternative that I'm trying to do. And I think a lot of us are in here doing this, part of social media, part of our efforts and passion to do that. And so this is something I'm really proud of, and encourage people to check out and see what we're up to, because I think, we're reaching this sort of point. It's kind of like when I see the politicians arguing about access to healthcare, and it reminds me of being on the Titanic and arguing about the deck chairs, where to arrange the deck chairs. I mean, we need to dramatically change the way we approach prevention, diet, nutrition, healthcare in the United States. We need to just get off the Titanic and get on a different boat, because it's sinking. And what we're doing is pouring more money into that. It's just obviously not. It's $3.5 trillion a year. Indirectly, it's about 50% of our GDP. It's unsustainable, and so we have to change it.
I hear you, man. Amen to that. Well, listen, I really do appreciate. I was really looking forward to talking to you, and because of the fact that I think we have something in common with our diets. The way we did this. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and maybe somewhere down the road, we'll cross paths. I'm down in LA. Venice Beach is still, I used to train at Gold's and live down there. I train with Platts, and it's like my second home. And so maybe one of these days we cross paths, man.
Let's hook up for a training session, man. I'm in Orange County, so not far. We could probably make that happen. That'd be a lot of fun.
Beautiful. That sounds good. Hey, do you know Denny Keikos?
I don't. No, I don't know.
Okay, he's Iron Man. He owns Iron Man now. He lives down there in Orange County, so I don't know where. But
I just I'm training a lot at my house. I spent years acquiring equipment. It worked out pretty well during this lockdown.
Yeah, no kidding.
Everything I want. So I'm not really doing bodybuilding. I'm doing more performance stuff, but I still do the lifting and stuff. So
beautiful. Well, listen, it was very enlightening, and I do appreciate you coming on. We'll talk next time.
Thanks for having me on. Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Shawn.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Serious Growth Podcast. For more episodes like the one you just listened to, subscribe to us on your mobile podcast app and leave us a review. If you'd like to reach out, you can find us online at seriousgrowth.com. Until next time, train smart and train hard.